Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is your go-to for accessible and relatable astrology designed to help you understand your inner workings and spiritual awakening. I'm your host, Natha Perkins. Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is another week, and I am Natha. We are going to go into everybody's favorite episode, which is the shadow episode of, in this case, Virgo. You've heard me say, I think Virgo might be the most difficult archetype that we work with. And on the other side of that is Pisces. They go hand in hand. They work tandem together to present us, I think, with our trickiest life and spiritual lessons. So if you are new to this podcast, season 5 goes into facets of every sun sign. And my approach is to teach you astrology, but it's more to teach you about yourself, your own psyche, your own consciousness through the lens of astrology, because astrology is an organizing tool. It is so perfect for describing all of these aspects of our human psychology that we're all dealing with all day, every day. I'm asking you questions that are designed to make you self-inquire, that are designed to understand yourself as a human and as a spiritual being. So yes, it is astrology, but it is so much more than that. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave comments. There's all these different ways to get this content boosted out to more people. And most importantly, share these episodes with your friends. If you know somebody that has a sun sign in the sign that we're talking about, which will be a new sun sign every month, and you think an episode would benefit them, send it their way. And know that we all have all of these archetypes that are existing within us. You do not have to have a sun sign to relate to these archetypes. If you like my style and you want to book a private reading, or you would like to work with me in some way, you can find me at electraastrology.com. You can also find me on Instagram at electra_astrology. And I post these on YouTube as well if you are a video person and you would rather watch. So we're talking about Virgo, the Virgo shadow specifically. Now, we all carry a strong Virgo shadow. I have worked with thousands and thousands of clients. And I also have my own felt and lived experience with this. And I have a lot of friends and family. And I see a consistent theme with this particular energy. And it all runs through us like a common thread. Virgo is where we are beginning to understand that it's not just about us, that we have an impact on the world, and that there are things that we want from other people. There are things that we want from ourselves, and we have to work to get them. And this is where Virgo comes in. So Virgo is the archetype of the helper. And if you are an Enneagram person, and really I should be talking more about Enneagram because I know there are a lot of you that listen that are studying Enneagram as well. This is very much an Enneagram 1 kind of archetype. But I would also say it fits the 2 and the 3 as well, because the 1 part of Virgo is the part that says there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And I want things to be the right way. And of course, the right way is very unique to each of us. We each have our own right way and our own standards that we're trying to uphold. And that's one of the places that this Virgo can get really tricky, because your standard might be really different than my standard. And we're both trying to be good, and we're both trying to be right. And what happens when we don't meet? I'm expecting you to perform in some way so that I feel like life is going smoothly. You're expecting me to perform in the same way that you would if you felt that things are going smoothly. And that's part of the problem of being in a collective and expecting that everybody follow the same rules. And rules are definitely a Virgo thing. This concept over the last 4 or 5 years of virtue signaling, we've all heard that term, where there's a desire to show people how good you are and how you're following the rules and you're doing it the right way. And maybe on the other side of that, they're doing it the wrong way and they're not following the rules. And therefore, that positions you as being good and it positions them as being bad. So this concept of being good versus being bad. And if you think back into your history at what being good versus being bad looked like in your family of origin, very likely being good was what was more desirable. Wanting to get the pat on the back, wanting to do things the right way to please mom and dad. Also, if you have any sort of organized religion in your background. And what I have found is that you don't even have to be raised religiously, but if there has been some strong religion that has been with your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, we do have those dogmas that are passed down to us, even if they weren't spoken to us when we were younger, we still feel it. And organized religion has a lot of strong Virgo themes running through it. This idea that you have to do it the right way, you have to please God. It's a judgmental God, and you don't want to mess up. And then that filters down into parenting. And a lot of the ways that people were trained to parent was that you had to have kids that were in line, that were listening to you. And that's what it meant to be good when you were a kid. Are you a good listener? Do you follow instructions? Are you getting the approval of the adults? And of course, on the other side of Virgo, which we'll talk about when we're doing the Virgo Pisces episode, is Pisces being the energy of God, of higher power, of the divine. But look at how easily it gets distorted when you're taking this beautiful energy, this Piscean energy of everything is perfect as it is. It might not feel perfect on our Virgo human side, but we know on the divine God side, the universal flow side, that there's usually some bigger reason for things that are happening. When we're looking at this axis and we're saying this is a really difficult axis, part of it is because Pisces is unexplainable. Pisces is totally without our control, and it doesn't fit into that same set of rules as Virgo does. We want things to be our way now on this timeline, and they better be right. So we look at how we get into this Virgo state of mind and how easy it is to feel like that's the right way. And so whether you have organized religion in your background, that's one way that you might come into embodying and internalizing this Virgo stuff. If you had parents who worked on like a point system of if you're good, you get this. If you're bad, then this happens. Schools are very right and wrong. You have to follow the rules. You have to walk in a straight line down the hallways, or else you get in trouble. Getting in trouble is really hard for that Virgo archetype because we want the approval. We want to do the right thing and we want to seem virtuous. And so we bring in this idea of our inner critical voice and we say, okay, well, maybe it's not so much that we're trying to appear virtuous to those outside of us, although my guess is that we probably are. We want to be good, but also that inner critical voice can be absolutely relentless. Virgo is the hardest next to Capricorn of the inner critical energies. We hold ourselves to very high standards. We hold others to very high standards as well. But ultimately, it comes down to how we are talking to and treating ourselves. So part of what becomes so shadowy and so difficult about Virgo, if we aren't doing it right, if we make a mistake, if we agree to go to a party and then at the last minute decide we're too tired and we don't go, then we are giving ourselves this whole dose of guilt and shame. We're worried that we're going to upset the host. They're going to be mad at us. They're going to think we're flaky. We're not going to get invited to anything again. If we make a mistake at work, it's like, oh my God, I've let my boss down. I'm so embarrassed. My client thinks that I'm an idiot. If I get some sort of criticism from my partner, it's like, oh my God, I screwed that up. I'm so bad. I mean, think of all of the places in your own life where when you have made little mistakes or you have changed your mind or you have not scurried to get somebody else's approval, you've really had to disappoint somebody. Just think about the emotional impact on you and what you have dragged yourself through as you have ruminated and gone back and forth and felt bad about. Take a few deep breaths into that. When we start talking about these things, we start to get contracted in the body. We start taking shallow breaths because guilt and shame really is right below the surface for most of us. It's very easy to tap into those things when we feel that we have been quote unquote bad. So give that some breath and think about this concept of guilt and shame and how often it floods into your experience. Now, guilt and shame can also be a Scorpio thing, but with Scorpio, the way that we cope with it is usually by acting out in some way. We might use drugs, alcohol, some sort of numbing agent. We might blame other people for what was happening. With Virgo, the way that we cope with guilt and shame is by being good, being better, doing it better next time, saying yes to all the invitations, making sure not to change our minds next time. It also looks a lot like getting busy, taking more onto our plates so that everybody can see how good we are, how helpful we are, how many things we can manage. Busyness as a badge of honor. We've all seen that show up in our own lives. When I liken Virgo to the Enneagram 2, the Enneagram 2 loves to show up and be of help, always trying to make sure that everybody feels tended to, everybody's problems are solved. Think of the places in your life. They may be only specific places, maybe at home that you turn into the biggest Virgo, maybe at work. But think about those places where you consistently find yourself scurrying around, making sure that everybody's needs are met. I had an interesting conversation in one of my moon circles that I hosted this summer, and we talked about acts of service as a love language and how that was very Virgo in nature. Let me do things to prove how much I love you. Great. That's a great love language to have. And it can get a little bit sticky in there because when we are doing things to show our love, it easily slips into doing things to prove our worth. If I do enough for you, will you love me? Will you think I'm valuable? And I think that that's something that we all deal with this Virgo archetype. I want to be valuable. I want to be seen as good, as helpful, as virtuous. I want to be a good member of this family. I want to be a valuable member of this community. And therefore, I must show up, and I must give of myself. So where do you do that in your life? So let's say that you are not necessarily a doer for other people. Maybe that's not your MO, but maybe you hold yourself to these very high internal standards. Maybe it's that you push yourself to go work out, or you don't allow yourself to eat enough food, or you're a compulsive cleaner. It can take all forms of ways that we do not let ourselves rest. We have these structures in place, usually put into place by our own mind. And Mercury rules Virgo. Mercury also rules Gemini, which is the sign of the mind and how we take in information. And then Mercury, as a ruler of Virgo, has a lot to do with how we use that information. What do we do with it? Literally do. So we're doing. We are restricting, we're tidying, we're cleaning. We want to make sure that we look good, not just from the outside, but from the inside. Because that inner critical voice can be one of the most relentless, damaging things that we each have going for us. And if you're not aware of your own inner critic, then forget it. It's like having a dictator that is completely unchecked, that nobody is challenging. And so part of this self-awareness work, when you're exploring who you are and you're tapping into your spiritual tools, you're becoming more self-aware, is in understanding what your inner critic sounds like, what it will beat you up about, and what standards and rules it has for you, which is why it could look anything like I'm helpful to people. I'm relentless with my acts of service. I also hold myself to my own rules and I follow my own rules. And then we have the other part of Virgo, which is where we are looking at other people and saying, you need to please me. You need to have virtuous acts that agree with what my rules are. You need to prove that you're good to me. So I jokingly call this our inner Karen. So we've all heard the term Karen as somebody that's always wanting to speak to the manager. Now, Think about that internal part of you that is always wanting to speak to the manager, that's judging, that's looking at other people and saying, oh my God, look at what they're wearing. Can you believe that she said that? They are going to vote for so and so. They didn't mow their yard. All of those little things. And we each have our like little things that really bug us about people. Our inner critic wants to go in and control them. We want them to please us. And we want them to fit into our roles, our rules of what is right and wrong. So this is why I say Virgo is just an incredibly sticky, tricky archetype, because it's going both ways. It's, I'm holding you to high standards. I'm holding myself to high standards. There are black and white rules and regulations. And when I liken Virgo to the Enneagram 3, that's the wanting to look good for everything that we do. So there's this comparison too. Well, I'm a good person because I mow my lawn every week. They're a bad person because they haven't mowed their lawn all summer. I'm a good person because I eat a healthy diet. They're a bad person because they're eating a bunch of crap. These are silly examples, but it's head-wrecking. Like, how do we get out of this Virgo stuff? How do we free ourselves from it? And it's usually so ingrained within us. It's happening on autopilot. So how do we get a handle on it? Because Virgo and the sixth house rule the nervous system, it really impacts our nervous system, going both ways. When we are running around, head down, trying to do all the chores, trying to do them right, it's draining. When we are sitting at our kitchen window, looking out at the neighbors and figuring out all the ways that they've messed up, it's draining. Inner critic beating us up, telling us we need to do more, it's draining. So essentially all of this over striving with Virgo, all of this black and white, right and wrong, just ends up being quite exhausting. So when we are trying to, as Brene Brown says, hustle for our worthiness, it doesn't work very well. We just end up hustling and we don't really feel that worthy, because once we cross one thing off the list, something else pops onto the list to take its place. So how do we work with the Virgo shadow is the question. And there's a few different ways to do that. Virgo is an earth sign. So in the same way that we look to each of the elements for the remedies, well, getting out into nature, getting out into the garden where there isn't a level of perfection. You're never going to have your garden be perfect. Anytime you're out trying to harvest, your hands are going to get dirty, and that's okay. You're going to have vegetables that have bugs eating them, and that's okay. So there's something that's valuable about being out in the flow of nature and really watching how nature has this beautiful way of being perfect and also being imperfect. You might find the most perfectly beautiful apple and you bite into it and it's too sour to eat. Or you might find an apple that has a big wormhole in it and you bite into the other side and it's the most delicious thing you've ever had. When you notice your nervous system going into overdrive and you can't stop, you can't slow down, you're trying to get your own approval, you're trying to get approval from everybody else, deep breath, go out into nature. See whether you can sit quietly and just observe the natural flow and the non-resistance of the natural world. The other remedy is through that lens of Pisces. And that is where we zoom out, we become quiet. We start to see that it's not about all of the effort. It is about trusting that if we put our focus on the things that feel good to us, there's going to be more flow. It's when we are head down doing all the things that we hate that it blows our nervous system out, because then we start to feel resentful about what we're doing. And if we don't get the approval for what we're doing, we don't have people that say, you're such a good girl, you're such a good boy, so proud of you, then it's like, wow, what's the point? Now I'm really annoyed. So if you ever find yourself saying, after all I've done for them, you know that you are on the difficult side of Virgo, that you have overextended yourself, you have crossed your own boundaries, you're doing things that did not make you feel happy in the first place, and that it's time to get out into nature, it's time to get quiet, tune into your spiritual practices, whether that's praying, journaling, pulling cards, just taking some moments of silence to connect in with your heart, as we learned about in Leo season, letting your heart guide you. And once you practice some of those things, you'll find that your attachment to rolling up your sleeves and doing all the stuff starts to get less and less. But again, Virgo can be very much an autopilot condition, where if you are not aware that you're doing it, then you're just doing it. You're just going all the time. For the rest of this week, your homework, if you so wish to take on some self-observation, is to become more aware of all of the things that you're doing on a daily basis, especially the things that fall under the category of, I have to do this in order to please my inner critic, or I'm going to get beaten up, or I'm doing this because I'm trying to get the approval of the people around me, or wow, I'm judging somebody else. And so we could put all of this under the umbrella of the inner critic. And I've suggested this before. I think it's a great practice to name your inner critic. If you want to listen to some more teachings on the inner critic, go back to the Capricorn episodes. If you name your inner critic, I once named mine Helen. I started to notice that Helen was just hanging out all the time. Helen always had something to say. Once I personified Helen, oh, Helen's here. I could also turn to Helen and say, thank you for trying to help, and I don't need your help right now. And it really does work. It really makes quite a difference. When your inner critic is no longer the unchecked dictator, your higher self begins to have more control and life begins to feel more balanced. All right, let's talk about the astrology of the week. Okay, so we're beginning the week on Monday, August 26th. The sun has made its way to 4 degrees of Virgo, which is that Mercury retrograde stationing degree. So you might get an epiphany or some information or some insight into this Mercury retrograde journey for you. This week, Mercury does station direct, although we won't be out of the shadow period until Mercury gets back to 4 degrees of Virgo. So something to be looked at here, something coming to light this Monday. On the 27th, we have Venus making a nice trine to Uranus. This is going to be helpful. You know, we're still working with some of that fallout from the Virgo Venus in opposition to Saturn and squaring Jupiter and Mars from last week. And so if there's any residual stuff around your value, around your finances, this might bring in some fresh new perspective and some ways of looking at it. A lot of times when you look around and you realize there are more opportunities here than you originally saw, and there are, in fact, more ideas that you can implement that originally were hidden to you. On the 28th, we finally have that Mercury stationing to go direct again. This doesn't mean that the chaos is over. And this does seem to have been a more chaotic Mercury retrograde than most, at least compared to what I have heard from all of you guys that I've been working with. Mercury stationing direct in the sign of Leo. Again, it takes all of that responsibility for how you perceive things. And it reminds you that you have personal power, you have personal choice, and that a lot of times it's just simply a matter of reframing the way that something looks in order to soothe your nervous system. You don't have to get so caught up in what you have always believed or in those neural pathways that already exist, because this is about taking that responsibility and saying, how do I wish for this information or this conversation to impact me? And then also, how am I responding to it? How am I communicating about it? Now, Mercury is going to be slowed for a while and it will start to pick up speed. So whatever it was that, whatever drama popped up in the middle of Mercury retrograde will start to smooth itself out now. So that will be good, but it might take a little bit of time. On the 29th, Venus leaves the sign of Virgo into Libra. Venus rules Libra, so she does like to be there, although very quickly she's going to have to make a meeting with the South Node, which is going to be difficult. But at least for now, Venus is out of her fall position in the sign of Virgo. Venus does not like to be virginal. Venus does not like to be all stressed out about the details, but Venus hits Libra and deep breath. Although, like I said, there's this anticipation of this meeting with Venus and the South Node. We've been working on South Node stuff for a really long time as it pertains to Venus. But as you've heard me say, I would phrase it as the emptiness, the places where you get fake or you consider fake things to be of value. Just be watching that because that South Node has really been trying to educate you over the last year plus about how to release the fakeness, the emptiness out of your life. And so next week, I'll talk about Venus meeting with the South Node, but there's going to be something or some things that likely pop up into your experience that really help you get clear on what is fake in your life that you no longer want to be a part of it. Now, we also have Juno already in a conjunction with the South Node here. Juno and Venus, both relational archetypes. Venus is the part of us that flirts and wants passion and wants to be appealing and attractive. And Juno is the part of us that makes the commitment to the long-term relationships, even when the road gets rocky. Interesting that both relationship archetypes are meeting with the South Node this week. Venus meets on September 3rd. Something about your relationships is going to come into focus for you here about ways that you have either interacted with your relationships in the past that didn't work, that became toxic or became something that you couldn't endure. But also, again, we're releasing the fakeness. We're releasing the tendency to people please, to just keep people happy in order to avoid any conflict. And honestly, although now isn't the best time to be yelling at people and be super opinionated and trying to get people to agree with you, as we just talked about, it's really draining to do that. But this certainly is a time when you don't want to be afraid of rocking the boat. If there's something that comes up, you don't want to be swallowing your truth just to keep the peace. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be righteous and dictatorial and pull out that I'm better than you and here's why card. But it is in alignment with this North Node in the sign of Aries to just stand strongly in your power. And if you need to address something, just lay it out. Being aware of your impact on others, being aware that you really have more control over any given situation. Disagreements and arguments do not have to be big and explosive and end in estrangement. They can be really productive where both parties leave feeling heard and seen, and the repair happens. Finally, on September 1st, we see Pluto getting ready to enter into Capricorn. We felt a buildup for this energy. It's not like we haven't felt this. We've known that it was coming, the knock on the door. Now it's time to open the door. This is going back into all of that stuff that you've been working with since early 2009. What comes to mind? What have you been processing over the last few months? What's been coming into your awareness? What kind of memories, kind of relationship dynamics have you had a little ping about, like, oh, wow. Because as Pluto makes its final move through Capricorn for the last time in our lifetimes, the awarenesses are hopefully coming up for you. And Pluto is here to break down all the old traditional rules and structures and systems that aren't working. So this is not going to feel very comfortable looking out at the world and seeing the structures that are collapsing by any means. And it might not feel that comfortable on an internal level too. But remember, Pluto is always about power reclamation. And if there are systems and structures and even habitual ways that you have gone about living your life and running your relationships that are just no longer serving you. It's old rules built for an old you. This is really that final push to transform and look around and say, what do I want it to look like instead? Who am I outsourcing my authority to? That's Capricorn. And am I ready to start taking personal responsibility again? It means I have to be responsible for my failures, but it also means that I can learn from my failures so that I am a stronger, more aligned, more capable person. So it's a lot. We go pretty much quickly into the new moon in Virgo on Monday. So I'll talk more about that in next week's podcast, and you'll see it on my Instagram and in the newsletter. Just remember that this is the time where you're working with your tools. You're coming into your body. You are coming into the present moment. You're taking your deep breaths. You're really seeing yourself clearly. You are paying attention to your own inner critic and how much it's beating up on you and everybody around you. And remember, we're trying to do the deeper healing work right now so that we make a ripple effect out into the planet so that more people are more healed, more regulated. All right. Hope you have a great week. Talk to you guys next week. Thanks so much for joining me. If you have enjoyed what you have heard, like, subscribe, leave a message, leave a review. You can find me on Instagram at Electra_astrology or on my website at electraastrology.com.